Welcome to RCR Insights. I'm Martha DeGrasse, and our topic today is Wi-Fi offload for service providers. I'm joined by Claus Hetting. He is CEO of Hetting Consultants. Claus, thanks for joining us from Europe today.
Great to be back, Martha. Thanks very much.
And also here is Matt Davis. He is VP of Program Development at Nexius. Matt, thank you very much for fitting us in today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I'd like to start off by talking to both of you about Wi-Fi offload overseas. You've both talked to me in the past about how some countries outside of the U.S. have taken big strides and are all in. So, Claus, you're right in the middle of it over in Europe. Give us an overview.
Yeah, well, I think it's still a scattered picture as far as the acceptance and of Wi-Fi offload, whether or not mobile operators embrace Wi-Fi offload over here. There's a couple, I would say, that are relatively aggressively embracing Wi-Fi in all its forms, including offload, and one such example I'd say is Orange. We've also seen a couple of very progressive challenger operators in France, for example, Free, who's using Wi-Fi, including offload, very, very aggressively and with great success. So I would say that there's a handful of them. Worldwide, I'd say there's probably 20 to 30 Tier 1 type operators, especially in Asia and in Europe, that are actively pursuing Wi-Fi offload as a strategy and have implemented what I call seamless Wi-Fi offload. But we still have yet to see, in my view, shall we say, the sharp portion of the S-curve. And personally, I have no doubt that we will see that. I think sooner or later, probably within a time span of maybe 0 to 3 years, we will see most operators, mobile operators in the world, adopt Wi-Fi offload in some form, or should I say, perhaps offload is not precisely the right word. Perhaps the right word is mobile/Wi-Fi integration, so that Wi-Fi becomes an integrated part of their service strategy, and including, of course, seamless handoffs between the two technologies and so on.
Now, would you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, I actually agree with everything he said. You see a lot in Asia, for example. You have limited spectrum, and that spectrum has a cost to it. You can only fit so much traffic, voice or data, over that spectrum, and so Wi-Fi offload has become a key component to their strategy and their solution, and it makes a lot of sense.
And what do you think is the outlook here in the U.S.? It seems to me that the carriers are a lot more open to Wi-Fi and understand that it's complementary, not necessarily competitive here in the U.S., and that we're seeing more and more offload. What are you seeing, Matt? I know you're working with a lot of the different carriers.
Yeah, so you see a lot of data trends. Again, internationally, you can use those as predictors, where you see large amounts of data being used in smaller environments. And so the United States has that scenario as well in some of the Tier 1 cities, for example, high venue areas. And in the past, it's been served with DAS and small cell, and with good results. But there's challenges with those technologies, and there's some cost components with those technologies. And so you are starting to see Wi-Fi solutions being deployed. Again, at a smaller level currently, but you're starting to see the infrastructure spend being placed, knowing that Wi-Fi technology is a pretty known technology. There's variations, and there's always generations of growth there, but it's a solution you can deploy now, knowing that it's going to be used, to Klaus's point, in 1 to 3 years. And I think we'll continue to see that, and there's a lot to be figured out on that. A lot of the solution, or the keys to the solution, are how do you ensure that you're going to have good data quality going over those Wi-Fi connections? How can you be sure that that Wi-Fi connection is going to be there throughout your call? How do you hand off a call or a data session when you're going from one Wi-Fi point to another? And there's always the in-building versus out-building solution as well, or outdoor solution, which is 86% of phone calls, I believe, originate indoors for cellular service, and trying to solve all that is going to be a key component, but really understanding that this is a reliable Wi-Fi connection, that is going to be consistent, that you can actually inspect the metrics for that connection so that you can use it is going to be key.
Okay, so you brought up several points: handoffs, quality of service, security is another one that we should talk about. So let's take them one by one, starting with the quality of service. Klaus, what do you think is the key to ensuring that from the carrier's point of view?
Well, right. Well, exactly. There's a number of things, and we could probably talk about that all day. But I think my message to everybody out there is that basically all the technology is in place today to ensure that the end user gets the right quality of service with Wi-Fi. To me, there's no question about that. We've got outstanding Wi-Fi vendors out there that have, for many, many years, worked on developing interference suppression techniques and getting the performance up and way beyond what you can actually do with mobile today. So the performance is certainly there. On the device side, we have many companies now active in making sure that there's a possibility of including policies on the device and intelligent network selection mechanisms that allow the device to make an informed decision as to what network is better and whether the Wi-Fi network you happen to be close to is actually acceptable in terms of quality of service. And there's a number of other mechanisms. So all of this is in place and is being used, as I said, in a small number of cases still, but it's increasingly being used. Now, so it's not really a technical issue. I think the adoption of Wi-Fi offload and Wi-Fi as a complementary technology to mobile has to do with carriers, shall we say, accepting that it's a somewhat of a different paradigm, technically speaking, to go with Wi-Fi rather than mobile. There's certain things you can't control from a network-centric point of view. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible to control the quality or deliver the right quality of service. You just do it in a different way. And I think mobile operators and carriers all over need to, I would say, get into that a little bit more. And once they understand it, they will certainly come to accept it.
Okay. Go ahead, Matt.
I think it's interesting. I agree with what you said, Klaus. Is the technology is there, the capability is there, the components are all there. The implementation on a network and the software components of that, at applied level, that still has a ways to go in the United States, and that's really the key trick there. A good clarification.
No, I agree with that. If I can just add, I agree with that completely, Matt. I think we are at a phase where there is a need for companies to step up and, shall we say, take a coordinating role in putting all these things together and in an end-to-end solution, because as you said, the components are there, and if the mobile operators don't have, they can't quite see that yet, it's certainly the job of us, right, both as analysts and system integrators and so forth, to show them how this is done. I absolutely totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about security, though. I know that people are concerned when they're on Wi-Fi networks about whether the data is secure, and if carriers are going to offer Wi-Fi, they need to sort of take responsibility there, right? Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing from carriers as they look at Wi-Fi as part of their offering?
Yeah, there's security and there's privacy, right? And both of those are key concerns. And I think you mentioned that earlier. It is on the privacy side, and we were talking about Asia earlier. That's a good place to start as an example. Is if you're allowing deep packet inspection, if you're allowing people to trace and see what essentially the concept of cookies, what usage you're providing, you now have a better. If you are able to use that data and that telemetry, you can use that from a cost component as far as marketing and advertising, reducing your overall capital spend again to support that data session or that voice session. So privacy is key, and I think that's a large conversation still to have happen. I don't think there's consensuses of what in each country or in each market what the user adoption would be and what their considerations are. And we've seen some pretty irregular patterns internationally with that topic. On the security side, absolutely security is key, and there's a privacy perspective, but there's a security piece of, is somebody trying to use data inappropriately, and that someone's going to be footed with the wrong side of the bill, and that's always key. We always have concerns about users overusing the network, and which is a good thing. You want to promote that, but at the same time, you see them using it for things that may outstrip the network, and you have to you have to make sure that you have cost coefficients in there that can handle that. There's also ways for people to spam Wi-Fi routers, string sessions along, and several other things that can really impact the overall cost components of a Wi-Fi offload solution. And so, building that trusted network of who is your Wi-Fi provider, how are the sessions going to be handled, what is the data that you're going to be allowed to provide over? Is it voice? Is it data? What type of data? How you handle 911 services and make sure that E911 is working from a security and safety perspective is key as well.
Now, 911. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, the security issue for me is again one of these technical things that, to the best of my knowledge, have been completely resolved, even at a standardization level. I mean, Hotspot 2.0 is a fully secure standard for seamless roaming that also includes the possibility for roaming between Wi-Fi and mobile. The 3GPP has standardized what's called a trusted network architecture for including Wi-Fi into shall we say, the inner fabric, the inner core of mobile networks, and this is also fully standardized and fully secure. So, I mean, the security issue I can see from a sort of common sort of open Wi-Fi hotspots point of view is a big one, but this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about professional carrier-grade solutions that are fully secure, right? So to me, it's that issue is, as far as I'm concerned, closed. But obviously, people do need to understand, what's in place already now, right? So there's some education that we have to do, I think, Matt.
Yeah, that's a great point. There at a residential home in the United States, you'll have a cable or ILEC or a carrier's device at your home that has a Wi-Fi capability, right? And the new standards have allowed for two SSIDs, one that the carrier kind of owns and controls, and one that is more of an open one. And making sure those devices connect to the carrier one, the protocols are in place to make sure it's a secure connection. If a user chooses to send a voice or data session over the unsecured portion or more of the home personal device, yeah, that can be a concern as well, and because one person could literally hear or see, have the ability to see and have telemetry on what your session may be over that unsecured piece of the pipe. So at a carrier level, absolutely. The security protocols are out there. They've been implemented. There's a lot of refinement still to do on them. I'd certainly say that. But the situation has been addressed, and I think though that we'll continue to find as we implement more and more of it and experience more scenarios that there will be another stair step that we'll have to perform in that area as well.
Now, what about the data collection and using that to enhance revenue? I know that's something that carriers want to do. Matt, I think that you're hearing a little bit of both sides of that argument, right?
Well, we are. You have the privacy versus the cost capabilities there, right? So on the privacy side, people don't want their data inspected if they don't have to, and people were concerned with the search engines in the past being able to see where they had gone and then provide advertising to it, and afraid that an inappropriate pop-up might come up, all sorts of things, and that was a concern then. It's going to be a concern now as we move to this new media type. You see, though, as spectrum becomes more and more limited, technology has stair functions that are 3-year, 5-year cycles pretty much on the wireless side. And so as you're dealing with that, you've got to figure out it's a tough conversation. There's arguments on both sides of it. If you can commoditize the data, you can help reduce the cost structure, and that's the second side of it. And there's a lot of synergies of you've already got an embedded outside plant connection to a Wi-Fi device in most cases. So you've got a asset already invested. If you can make additional revenue off of that asset through data inspection, and then using that for advertising purposes and targeted advertising purposes, now again you've got another revenue stream to put on top of that capital cost. That makes Wi-Fi solution in certain cases be more cost efficient than a traditional macro spectrum solution.
Yeah, what do you think, Claus? Or do you think people are going to get a little more comfortable with offers and advertising as part of their connectivity experience?
Yeah, I think they will eventually. It is a very tricky and in some ways a difficult discussion. I think you know, if, for example, I mean, if somebody offers free Wi-Fi, you know, presumably they do it for a reason and they want something in return, right? And I think most people are smart enough to realize that. And as long as you're clear on what it is that you're offering and you allow people to opt in or opt out as a part of the process, for example, of signing on, and as long as you're clear on what the conditions are and you're not trying to fool anybody into, you know, being receiving lots of spam and all these things, and as long as you you know, comply with regulations and data, you know, protection acts and so forth. And I think, you know, as this industry proceeds, we really have to, you know, basically have that discussion and start taking that very seriously, because the risk is, of course, that you know, these you know, for quick gains, that, you know, these services become tremendously unpopular and become, you know, battled in the press and all of that. We don't want that. I think there's a real value in free Wi-Fi if we can offer it, you know, with a decent set of rules where people understand what the trade-off is. And I think people will appreciate it, also if it's done intelligently, right?
Yeah, it's interesting in the United States, right? You're starting to see that free Wi-Fi offering, to your point, and you're seeing a large adoption of that. And that thing's really been kicking off. That space has kicked off in the last year pretty significantly. Right. And so you see that there's a certain level of users that are willing to adopt that solution. Usually it's in venues where it's high population, high traffic, maybe an airport or a train station or whatnot, and so they're willing to sacrifice that privacy. But it's starting to set the tone and getting people comfortable with it. And to Klaus's point, because there's an opt-in and they're setting the terms out there fairly in front of you, it's making people more comfortable about it. Now we have to transition to the next stage, which is you're using that as part of your normal daily communications from an LTE perspective, or from a cell phone perspective, and that's that next big step that the culture and the environment has to get used to, make their determinations on what they're willing to accept and what they're not. And there's always going to be a certain level of population that's more open to it, and there's going to be a level of population that says, I'd really like to keep that to myself. And and we've now shown the tools are there to say you can opt in, opt out, and I think that addresses a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Now, Klaus, do you talk much with the U.S. carriers about Wi-Fi offload?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, we had some big discussions going on at our Wi-Fi offload summit in Palo Alto in the middle of June that we just held a couple of months ago. And I know that, well, to be honest with you, I think that it's somewhat of a controversial issue to go the Wi-Fi route in the U.S. for the big mobile carriers. And I can tell you why that is. And the reason is that if one of the mobile carriers was to come out and say, we're going to go with Wi-Fi strategically, and we're going to use it to offload data, and we're going to use it in high-density situations all over the country and so on, that would put them in an extremely poor position in terms of lobbying for additional licensed spectrum, right? Now, I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of operators, and I would probably also include most of the U.S. operators, do actually have some form of offload going on in certain places, but are very reluctant to come out and say, this is what we're doing. And what you'll find is that a lot of operators will go into, for example, stadiums and in other select locations actually use Wi-Fi proactively in that way, but they won't come out and announce it. So, and that's understandable coming from their point of view, that, you know, they need to you know, protect their position and all of that. And I think so it is a big jump to go out there and say we're going to go Wi-Fi all the way, because specifically for that reason. Nonetheless, I think it is going to happen sooner or later, just for the simple reason that there's 500 megahertz of Wi-Fi spectrum out there that anybody can use, including the carriers. The carriers are in an excellent position to use them because they can use carrier-grade Wi-Fi systems, right? And they can deploy those, you know, professionally and so on. So who in their right mind wouldn't start using the 500 megahertz of free spectrum, you know, in addition to the 20 megahertz of, you know, incredibly expensive licensed spectrum they have, right? 2 by 20 megahertz or whatever the number is. It's you know, the unlicensed is about 10 times as much. So eventually, I think we will get there, but it is. It is a tricky thing politically and so forth for a lot of carriers to navigate, and I can certainly understand that.
I know that the device makers are starting to support voice over Wi-Fi, Apple among them. Do you think that that trend will encourage the carriers to be more upfront about their plans? Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I do. You know, inside the LTE protocol, there's ability for the carriers to go ahead and submit data over to a Wi-Fi network without the user's permission. I think that there's very heavy policies at different companies of how that's being adopted. Yeah, so it's interesting how that plays out. You do have a lot of capacity there. You're starting to see small cell deployments being coupled with Wi-Fi solutions, so that the different ways that a network can be interacted with, you can exchange whether you want to go on a traditional macro network via a small cell device, or if you want to go right to a Wi-Fi solution. So there's many different answers to that question.
Okay, great. Well, we are running low on time. Do either of you have anything further that you think we should discuss? Klaus, do you have anything further?
No, I just like to reiterate that I'm totally with you, Matt. All the mechanisms, all the technologies in place to do this, and I think as you and I and a handful, maybe a little bit more than a handful of other people are super strong proponents. I think worldwide Wi-Fi offload is a huge business opportunity. I think we should keep pushing it because we're just at the bottom of the S-curve, really, and I think we will see this happening for the next couple of years. So it's great to be on the show to get a chance to evangelize a bit about it.
Right. Well, it's definitely an issue that we want to keep learning about and covering. And Matt, I know that you're an evangelist too. You're the you brought my attention to this issue a couple of weeks ago. So, do you have any closing comments?
No, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this gets applied internationally as well as in the United States. It's interesting. We talked about the free Wi-Fi providers and how they're offering up, the release of privacy for Spectrum. It's interesting that we're seeing some new applied solutions with combined small cell and Wi-Fi. We're watching the cable companies as they're deploying home and business solutions that they're implementing Wi-Fi, and then we're hearing rumblings of there's been articles out there of Google looking at offering a Wi-Fi based cellular phone service with both voice and data on it, and it primarily uses Wi-Fi, and then when it's outside of the network it switches over to maybe an MVNO partner. How all of those things actually come to market, that's going to be exciting to see. And the next generation of technologies, whether it's the connected airplane from gate to gate or connected car, also have plays on some of those privacy and some of those Wi-Fi solutions. And so there's many different ways this gets applied, and I'm loving to watch all of those kind of unfold and roll out.
It is very exciting. All right, Matt Davis, VP of Program Development at Nexius. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much.
And Claus Hetting of Hetting Consultants. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to be back, Martha. Thanks very much.
Yeah, it's always great to see you. All right, this will be the end of the broadcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.